Modern cognitive psychology draws theories and techniques from different domains of research. These will be dealt with in this module. We will be introduced to cognitive neuroscience, memory, perception, pattern recognition, attention, consciousness, thinking and concept formation, imagery and language. In this module we will also know about human and artificial intelligence. This module will only introduce these concepts in brief as they will be dealt in detail in separate modules that follow. Figure 1. Domains of cognitive psychology. Language. Learning. Memory. Attention. Consciousness. Imagery. Human and artificial intelligence. Thinking and concept formation. Pattern recognition. Perception. Cognitive neuroscience. Cognitive psychology. Psychology Paper 1. Cognitive psychology. The following text will briefly talk about each of these domains of cognitive psychology. 3. Cognitive neuroscience. Cognitive neuroscience may be defined as the study of relationships between neuroscience and cognitive psychology, especially those theories of mind dealing with memory, sensation and perception, problem solving, language processing, motor functions and so forth. Modern cognitive psychology draws theories and techniques from cognitive neuroscience in the study of our mental character. Cognitive neuroscience sees memory, sensation, problem solving and other processes as neurophysiological correlates or simply as variables of microscopic structures of the brain. It tries to find physiological evidence for theoretical properties of mind, finds more comprehensive models of brain and behavior, establishes relationship between brain pathology and behavior, uses computers to model neurological functions and so forth. 4. Learning. The cognitive view of learning is an approach that views learning as an active mental process of acquiring, remembering and using knowledge. Cognitive psychologists assume that mental processes exist, that they can be studied scientifically and that humans are active participants in their own human acts of cognition. Ashcraft, 2006. Cognitive learning includes a change in the way information is processed as a result of experiences a person or animal has had. Due to past experiences, the significance and meaning of events change, new associations are formed and subsequently these changes get stored in the memory for future use. All these are part of cognitive learning. 5. Memory. When we think of memory, several questions cross our mind. What type of memory do we have? How do we remember and recall things based on our memory? Why do we forget certain information but clearly remember others even after a long time? How is this information stored and organized in our mind? How can we improve our memory? Psychologists have tried to seek answers to such questions for long. No other topic has been more comprehensively studied by psychologists than memory. Figure 2. A hierarchical memory system. Memory. Sensory memory. Short-term memory. Long-term memory. Psychology Paper 1. Cognitive psychology. One of the most enduring models of memory was proposed by William James, 1890, which although underwent significant elaborations over time, but still remains revered. This model maintained that memory is dichotomous in nature. Some things are perceived and enter the memory and then are lost, and there are other things that remain in the memory forever. This gives base to memory which can then be understood as sensory memory, short-term memory (STM), and long-term memory (LTM), which will be discussed at depth in the module on memory. Memory involves more than these storage systems. It also involves 3 basic processes that form mental representations and operate on them. It includes encoding, perceiving and recognizing, and processing this information further, which makes us remember it later. The way this information is encoded decides how well it will be remembered. When we receive some information through our sensory memory, it remains in our STM for a short duration of time. This information from STM is transferred to permanent storage in LTM, failing which, the memory of this information can be lost. This model of memory and other related concepts will be encountered in the modules on memory. 6. Perception. In the previous sections we have used the term perception. Our concern in this section is with understanding perception. It is the process through which we come to understand our surroundings. We know that human organisms are sensitive to sensory signals that we receive from the environment. The process involved with the detection and interpretation of these sensory stimuli is called perception. To understand perception, first let us understand the term sensation. Sensation refers to the initial detection, structure and processes of sensory mechanism, the eye, ear and so on, and the stimuli that affect those mechanisms. The term perception, on the other hand, involves higher order cognition in the interpretation of sensory information. Thus, while sensation involves initial detection of stimuli, perception means an interpretation of the things we sense. In other words, in perception we make an interpretation of sensory information, deriving some meaning from the stimulation. When we read a book, hear a friend's voice, have a message, smell a fragrance or taste a dish, we experience much more than the immediate sensory stimulation. Each of these sensory events is processed within the context of our knowledge of the world. Our previous experiences give meaning to simple sensory experiences. We are confronted with countless stimuli at any given time, but we cannot respond to all of them. There are 3 major components of perception, namely, selection, organization and interpretation. The first step in perception therefore involves the problem of selection, i.e., to which stimuli do we attend. Next task is to understand the stimuli in relation to one another. Some stimuli are dominant, others are subtle, some are common while others may be unique in some way or the other. The next step we encounter is how shall we organize this information. Third, when we have already organized this, what sort of interpretation do we draw out of it? What meaning does it hold to us? All these will be discussed in relation to perception, in the other modules. Perception is thus a critical determinant of the way we think about things and even influences the content of our thought processes. Understanding what our sensory system receives and what the mind. Psychology Paper 1. Cognitive psychology. Interprets occupies a central position in perception and cognition. Cognitive psychologists are interested in perception because cognition is presumed to be a consequence of external events, sensory detection, and is influenced by previous experience and knowledge about sensory experiences, which may tell us how information is abstracted at the cognitive level. 7. Pattern recognition. To understand pattern recognition, let us revisit what familiar objects did you see today. Ordinarily, the list of things you saw at any particular day would be very long. Now, think, how did you recognize so many objects and the two so rapidly and accurately? How do we so easily recognize the faces of our friends from among a large group of people, recognize a utensil even when it is kept upside down, and believe that partly hidden objects exist and also identify them correctly? How do we read words? These complex yet seemingly natural actions and processes are possible due to pattern recognition. When we see or hear something or we receive a stimuli from the environment, we tend to categorize the object on the basis of its perceived features. We perceive sensory events as part of a more meaningful pattern. To elaborate one specific example, think about the problem of reading. Reading is complex, in which a reader is required to form a meaningful pattern from an otherwise meaningless array of lines and curves. By organizing the stimuli into letters and words, the reader renders meaning to them. This involves a complex interaction between sensation, perception, STM, LTM, and so forth. Look at the figures below. Can you recognize any patterns in them? Figure 3. A Gestalt pattern. What you saw here were not complete triangles, but chances are that your mind itself organized and perceived them as triangles. The way we organize and classify visual stimuli was studied in Gestalt psychology, Gestalt meaning pattern or configuration, during the early part of the 20th century. The ability to identify and process visual patterns has been approached from several theoretical positions. Pattern recognition may be initiated by perceiving separated parts or defining features and assembling them into recognizable patterns, which can then be some bottom-up approach, or is a hypothesis held by the perceiver, which leads to recognition of the whole and subsequent recognition of. Psychology Paper 1. Cognitive Psychology. The components top-down approach. Gestalt theorists hold that people organize their perceptions into coherent wholes. Here, instead of perceiving bits and pieces of unrelated information, they usually perceive them as organized wholes. Figure below presents a few Gestalt principles. Figure 4. Principles of Gestalt. Gestalt psychologists propose the perception of visual patterns to be organized according to principles of proximity, similarity, and spontaneous organization. These will be dealt in detail on the module on perception. For now, let us move on acquainting ourselves with attention. 8. Attention. All of us face a myriad of cues that surround us at any given moment. At any given time, our sensory systems are continually attending to different sights, sounds, smells, and other signals from the external environment. Attention refers to selection of certain stimuli for processing from among many and focusing cognitive resources in those selected. Attention is the concentration of mental effort on sensory or mental events. Donald Broadbent 1958 stated that attention is a result of a limited capacity information processing system. His essential idea was that the world is made up of many more sensations that can be handled by the perceptual and cognitive capabilities of the human observer. Therefore, in order to cope with the flood of available information, humans selectively attend to only some of the cues and tune out much of the rest. Although at any given time we have more than one information that we have to attend to, it is evident that under normal circumstances we are highly selective in the amount and type of information to which we attend to. Our capacity to process incoming information seems to be limited at two levels: sensory and cognitive. If we have too many sensory clues or events to process at any given time, we can become overloaded with information and we may not be able to perform optimally. Has it ever happened to you at a party, when you are surrounded by many voices, sounds, and yet you choose to attend to only one, some of them? How did you decide whom to listen and attend to? In answer to this, research on attention generally covers 5 major aspects: processing capacity and selective attention, levels of arousal. Psychology Paper 1. Cognitive Psychology. Control of attention, consciousness, and cognitive neuroscience. Our everyday experiences tell us that we attend to some stimuli more than others, processing capacity and selectiveness. Thus, we can control which stimuli we will attend to control, and we do some tasks without paying conscious attention to them, i.e. do them almost automatically, automatic processing. Further, attention is supported by our brain and CNS, neurocognition. Lastly, attention brings events into consciousness. This will be elaborated in the next segment. 2 broad classes of theories have tried to explain attention: filter theories and capacity theories. Filter theories address the selective nature of attention, whereas capacity theories address the allocation of resources to specific mental processes. What we pay attention to is guided by what we already know, what we need to know, what else is happening at that time, by the complexity of the task, and by our ability to control or focus our attention. Driscoll, 2005. 9. Consciousness. What are you consciously aware of at this instant? List down. What is the source of this consciousness? Does your previous experience or memory play a role in what are you conscious of? Does anyone except you know about your thoughts? Did you ever have thoughts that you consciously chose to conceal from others? What made you do so? These are the type of questions that are dealt under the theme of consciousness. Consciousness is the awareness of environment and cognitive events such as sounds, sight, activity going on in the world, as well as of one's memories, thoughts, feelings, and bodily sensations. It is important to note here that consciousness includes both the realization of environmental stimuli as well as cognizance of one's own mental thoughts. These external stimuli and internal, often private thoughts interweave and determine who we are and what we think. Consciousness is also a core concept in cognitive psychology. But it has been a difficult one to investigate as the concept is not well defined. People mean different things when they talk about consciousness. 10. Thinking and concept formation. While you read these words, are you thinking? Even when you stop thinking about what you are reading, will you still be thinking, maybe of something else? We are thinking during most of our waking hours. It is hard not to think. Have you ever thought about what we do when we think? What happens when we think about thinking? Thinking and concept formation form important areas of inquiry in cognitive psychology. Thinking is a process by which a new mental representation is formed throughout the transformation of information by complex interaction of the mental attributes of judging, abstracting, reasoning, imagining, and problem solving. Concept formation refers to the discernment of the properties common to a class of objects and ideas and discovering rules that relate to those conceptual features. For example, man. Psychology Paper 1. Cognitive Psychology. blue, square, and happy, all are names of concepts. The human ability to form concepts enables us to classify things into categories. With this ability, we can sort objects into category fruit and non-category not fruit. When we make a classification, we tend to behave towards and think about members of a class in a similar way. Thus, concepts help us classify the diverse elements in the world around us into manageable categories that serve as convenient tools for thinking. 11. Human and artificial intelligence. We have seen a wide usage of the word intelligence in psychology as well as in everyday life. However, despite its wide usage, psychologists do not agree on a single definition of intelligence. We shall consider human intelligence to be the ability to acquire, recall, and use knowledge to understand concrete and abstract concepts and relationships among objects and ideas, and to use knowledge in a meaningful way. According to Nickerson, Perkins, and Smith 1985, human intelligence includes the ability to classify, modify behavior adaptively, learn, reason deductively and inductively, generalize, develop conceptual models and understand. The recent interest in artificial intelligence (AI) has caused many psychologists to rethink what is uniquely human about human intelligence and what abilities would a computer require to act humanly intelligent. Artificial intelligence is broadly defined as a branch of computer science that deals with the development of computers and computer programs which emulate human cognitive functions. Some of its implications can be found in speech and form recognition by computers, language understanding software, game playing like chess and motion games are a few to name. 12. Imagery. To understand imagery, let us undertake the following task. Make a map of the route you took to college from home. Write down directions for this route and ask your friend who has never been to college from your home or simply, who has not been through this route before to make the same map based on your instructions. Does the map made by your friend match the map that you have constructed yourself? Can you differentiate between the image that your friend constructed and the one that you have already experienced? These questions open door to larger questions such as what is a mental image and what are its properties? Is a mental image always real? These are some of the questions that have intrigued philosophers and cognitive psychologists alike. Mental imagery is defined as a mental representation of a non-present object or event. It includes visual images as well as images formed through other senses. The study of mental imagery engages the broader question of how information is stored and recalled from memory. Theorists argue that visual information is coded in terms of an internal picture that can be activated by calling upon the picture. It is also argued that visual information is stored as abstract statements about the image. To bring the Psychology Paper 1, Cognitive Psychology 2 together, we could argue that some information is stored visually and some is stored in an abstract form in the mind. There are three distinct theoretical positions that can be identified regarding how information is stored in memory. They include the dual coding hypotheses, the conceptual propositional hypotheses and the functional equivalency hypotheses. The dual coding hypotheses hold that information can be coded and stored as either or both verbal and imaginal systems. Pavio, 1971. The conceptual propositional hypotheses propose that visual and verbal information are represented in the form of abstract propositions about the objects and their relationships. Anderson and Bauer, 1973, Pilashan, 1981. The functional equivalency hypotheses suggest that imagery and perception are highly similar. Read the work of Shepard, 1990, Koslin, 1980. The problem caused by these three hypotheses suggests that coding of information is several layered and each of it transcribes information in its unique ways. 13. Language. Give a thought to the following questions. How do you recognize text? How do you comprehend spoken words? What memory processes would reading and writing entail? Do you think that each language has some specific rules? How did you acquire language? Is language a uniquely human accomplishment? Do specific areas in brain support language comprehension and production? Can you imagine reading this text if you had no language? How would you communicate your thoughts to others or for that matter to yourself without having language? These are some of the questions that you may like to seek answers to as far as language is concerned. Language is a system of communication in which thoughts are transmitted by means of sounds, as in speech and music, or symbols, as in written words and gestures. Language is the main means of human communication. Language is crucial to a wide range of human actions, including communication, thought, perceiving and representing information, higher order cognition and neurology. The way information is exchanged, stored and utilized forms an important piece of inquiry in cognitive psychology. Since language is an important component of information processing, storage and perception, all of which are fundamental aspects of cognition, it too becomes a significant pivot for investigation. Psycholinguists argue that our perception of the world is affected by language we use to describe it. Neuropsychologists believe that the processing of words, speech, and semantics seem to engage specific cerebral areas and thus provide a meaningful link between neuroanatomical structures and language. For these reasons, language has been extensively studied by psychologists, psycholinguists, and neuropsychologists. You will read about language structures and other related issues in the subsequent modules. 14. Summary. Memory can be categorized as sensory memory, short-term memory (STM), and long-term memory (LTM). Each has distinctive features. Psychology Paper 1, Cognitive Psychology. In perception, we make an interpretation of sensory information, deriving some meaning from the stimulation. There are three major components of perception, namely, selection, organization, and interpretation. Pattern recognition is the ability to abstract and integrate certain elements of a stimulus into an organized scheme for memory storage and retrieval. Gestalt means pattern or configuration. Gestalt psychologists hold that instead of perceiving bits and pieces of unrelated information, people perceive them as organized wholes. Attention is the concentration of mental effort on sensory or mental events. Two broad classes of theories have tried to explain attention: filter theories and capacity theories. Consciousness is the awareness of environment and cognitive events such as sounds, sight, activity going on in the world as well as of one's memories, thoughts, feelings and bodily sensations. Thinking is a process by which a new mental representation is formed throughout the transformation of information by complex interaction of the mental attributes of judging, abstracting, reasoning, imagining, and problem solving. Concept formation refers to the discernment of the properties common to a class of objects and ideas and discovering rules that relate to those conceptual features.